Well friends, here we are again. It's that time of the year where I make a video about why the game is bad, and usually I talk about what the devs could do to fix it. But I think at this point, I've come to peace with the fact that this game will never be great again. The reason for that is, I think, a lot simpler than most people think, right? The talk of the town has been 6v6. I'm not gonna pull a Samito and talk about 6v6 for the 20 millionth time. I think the issues that Overwatch has are non-related to 6v6 versus 5v5. They are related to an extent, but none of the two game modes will fix the game if this doesn't change. And what needs to change is this person over here. Now, not my friend SVP, he's cool, okay? I mean that guy over there, kind of grinning into the, well, not really grinning into the camera, but knowing that he has all the power, while also apparently wanting to destroy our game. With no sense, no purpose. All I can really say is incompetence. But let's get into it, okay? I want to talk about Alec Dawson. So he used to be the lead hero balance designer, now he's the lead hero designer, implying that he is doing a good job, while I think he's probably the worst influence on this game. Let me get this out of the way first. I don't know Alec Dawson personally. I'm sure he's a nice person in real life. But I think he has shown us time and time again that he is incapable of fixing this game. He's incapable of wanting to listen to the community. And that, I think, is partially to do with the culture Blizzard always had. Blizzard was always a company that created amazing games, right? And then they drove their games into the ground. Overwatch 1 was like that, with Jeff Kaplan, Jeff Goodman, right? Amazing game when it came out, and then they kind of drove it to the ground with the release of Brig. The issue there is that they refused to listen to the community. Same happened to Warcraft, same happened to Hearthstone, same happened way back in StarCraft 2, which used to be the biggest esport. Like, it blew up on Twitch. It was like the first thing that got Twitch really on the map, you know? I'm a boomer, by the way. I'm old, if you couldn't tell. They changed their ways, right? They say they're listening. Weekly or at least monthly blog posts about, like with Aaron Keller, talking about things. They recently opened up in the latest blog post about 6v6. They have this like open conversation with the community. And in the end, Blizzard is a company like any other. They need to make money, right? And in the end, what matters is how many skins they sell, how much money they make. So you have to understand one thing before we talk about all of this, and it's all gonna make sense. Blizzard is balancing the game and creating the game for player interaction. The way live service games put value on their players is they look how much time a person spends on their game, and look how much time they spend in a week in Overwatch. I'm not saying that's like morally wrong, right? That's the best metric for them to determine if they are doing a good job, and that's the best metric for how much money they're gonna make. Because the more time an average person spends in the game, the more likely they are to buy skins. I would not mind spending money in the game if the game was good. I want to talk about their philosophy in the game. And I want to show you what Alec Dawson has been cooking up over the last year and a half of Overwatch 2 balance. I'll give you the number one example that I think everyone can think of. When Mauga released in the pre-test, he was perceived weak by the developers, so they buffed him. This is the patch when Mauga came out on December the 19th, where they buffed him massively.
Don't care, still don't care.
And obviously, we all know what happened, right? He turned into a must pick. The meta was over Christmas because they were at home. The devs were obviously not working. It was actually a pretty fun meta for me. I made a video about it, like we got to rank 6 tank. It was really silly. And really it felt like one person on the team had all the impact and everyone else was just a pawn. Nobody else had fun, but I had fun. Does that remind you of something? Maybe the meta right now. Wait, not even tanks are having fun anymore. And I'll get into that in a second. Anyways, right? So they released Mauga. They realize he's too strong. And then they massively nerf him in the patch after. And the funny thing is, after that, Mauga saw a pretty low win rate. He wasn't being picked a lot anymore. He was a niche pick. But here's where we get into Blizzard's design philosophy. What the devs saw after the patch was in most ranks, all the way up to GM almost, Mauga lost like a massive percent of his win rate and went down to 40% win rate, which is okay for a niche pick, right? In Blizzard's eyes, everything needs to have around a 50% win rate. Orisa here is another example, right? We had so many patches with Orisa. She was really weak. And then they mega buff her. She's unkillable. Everyone plays Orisa only and nobody's having fun, right? And they go back and forth. The nerf buff, nerf buff, nerf buff, because they can't get to a 50% win rate. And here's the first thing that the devs should have realized a long time ago. Some heroes are better left niche, right? I would also argue that heroes that the community generally does not enjoy playing against much, like Roadhog, should be left niche. I'm not saying you're wrong for enjoying Roadhog. If you're a Roadhog main, don't be offended. It's like a niche character, and that's okay. But Blizzard always tries to go back to making every character 50% win rate, which is never gonna happen. In a complex game like Overwatch, where we have over 40 heroes now, it will never happen. So what does Blizzard do? After they nerf Mauga, and they see the win rate drop, even though he was still a very viable pick on some maps and he was very good in GM. A month after, they buff him. The funny thing is, content creators, for the record, I'm not part of the content creator program anymore. I left a while ago. I don't want to get back in there either, but usually content creators get previews of the patches early. And everyone saw those patch notes and was like, this is way too good, right? Like the cooldown reduction and a passive 100 health for just pressing the button. Everyone knew this was gonna make Mauga ruin the game again. But again, think about Blizzard's and Alec Dawson's philosophy here. Even though he's a Go player, probably doesn't even play the game himself, even though he came from a children's card game, Hearthstone, he thinks he knows better than really good players in the game. Over these patch notes, they go live. The ladder turns into absolute carnage for a week. And nothing is playable but Mauga. We're full-blown back to Mauga, even stronger than on release. And it gets so bad that literally the week after, right, they revert every single change and nerf his base health to where he's now was weaker than before, right? So we go from the 40% win rate Mauga, right? They buff him, he's mega OP, and they go right back down. What does this show you? A lack of understanding of the base game, right? If you are hired as a balance designer or the guy that balances the game, then you are supposed to understand what happens with current changes. I only take this as an example. For most changes in the game, they just flip-flop. They buff something, oh, it's OP, then they nerf it, revert it right back. We had so many changes. Like, I think Zarya got the same bubble change like 4 times, right? I think Orisa got the same changes like 5 times. They're just guessing. They're experimenting without doing actual research. And this wouldn't be an issue if it weren't at the detriment of the player base, right? Which brings me to why I actually wanted to make this video. It was this interview with Alec Dawson, Aaron Keller, and 2 content creators, SVB and Flats. I'm sure you heard of them. They went over multiple different things, right? Like talking about 6v6, right? After the blog post, talking about their design philosophy. And TLDR, overall the interview was fine. They promised like surprises other than one hero every 2 seasons, right? Or a map every season, right? They promised surprises. They were like, oh, we're experimenting different 5v5 game modes instead of 6v6. But this is the one answer that really got my blood boiling here, okay? So here is SVB asking why everyone hates each other in the roles, right? Is this always going to be a thing? Like, are we never going to have a balanced game where every role feels fair and fun to play, right? This is what he had to say.
On that note, as Flats mentioned, when the patch came out, I saw a lot of the community kind of react strongly to be like, oh my god, they've giga buff tanks, like this is going to be awful. I think another consequence of what's happened, I see this shift a lot more in Overwatch 2 than I did in Overwatch 1. It feels like each of the roles are at opposition with each other. Like, it feels like when, you know, at the start of Overwatch 2, we had like, oh, supports don't have enough, and we needed to fix supports. Then for a while, it was like, we need to get DPS more stuff, and then it was like, they get the DPS passive. Now we're back to like, well, tanks need more stuff.
Which, by the way, is a very good point by SVB. He's literally just explaining the issue, right? Like how support was arguably broken for like multiple months, and then they add like the patch in Season 9, which was really well received, where DPS becomes insanely strong, and now they're buffing tank. It really looks like they don't know what they're doing. I want you to really take in this answer. I think it shows a lot of the mentality that Alec Dawson has in regards to the game and how little he values your time as a player and how little he values your opinion as a player.
Like, does it always have to be this way, or do you guys feel like you do have ideas for how to solve that constant friction between the roles?
I think it's a matter of how far apart that is at any given time. Depending on if it's closer together, I think at the moment you look at it, tanks definitely, well, tanks have always had the most influence on a match throughout Overwatch.
So what he just confirmed is, if you play any game of Overwatch at any rank, tank, on average, was always the most influential, which means the impact of the 2 tank players was always the highest in a match. If your tank is better than the other tank, you're more likely to win than if your DPS was better than the other DPS. Now, obviously, there's margins to that, right? But I want you to understand, they see in their statistics and saw that tank has always been the role with the most impact. Now, don't take the most impact with fun, right? Tank is a really unfun role, and I still think it is.
Whether that experience felt good or not is a subjective opinion, right?
They know tank is the strongest, and they basically say, we don't really care if you think that's fun.
But they've always had the most influence on how a match results. But at the moment, they definitely have a lot of the power as well.
I would love for Alec Dawson to explain the difference between influence and power. It's the same thing. It's a bunch of politics talk, basically.
So I think, yeah, are they pushed a little far? Maybe, yes. And that was, you know, somewhat intentional.
So we're talking about the latest patch. The patch where tank rolls the entire lobby. Are they pushed a little far? Maybe, but that was intentional. You can't have a role be too powerful and make it intentional. No responsibility here. But by the way, during this entire 2-3 hour interview, not a single time did Alec Dawson take responsibility for any of the fuck-ups. Always acting like it was planned, right? It was planned. Anyways, we continue.
Kind of shake the core of the game a little bit too far, but we wanted to make sure that tanks were more resilient.
So they know tank has the most influence on the outcome of the game since the start of Overwatch 2, and they realized they went too far, but it was intentional. Can someone explain that to me?
Everyone dies more post season 9, right? For the amount of damage they take. But tanks had the biggest drop in what we would call tankiness there compared to any other role. It was almost double some of the other roles in terms of like how much damage they were taking for how much they were dying. So we wanted to kind of even that out a little bit, make them more resilient, make them feel like they could actually make plays with, be able to step forward without, blowing up. So right now, I mean, we're still evaluating it, but I think it's just a matter of how far apart those roles are. I think one role might be a little bit better than another role at any given time.
But you just confirmed that tank has always been better than the other two roles since launch.
But if they're too far apart, that's when I think when we should probably, take a look at bringing them back in a little bit. They
intentionally overbuff a certain role with the goal of making people play the game more. Which you could say, Metro, that makes sense, right? They're a company. They want people to play the game. Now here's the issue with that. And here is why 6v6 won't fix this. And here's why this game will never be fixed and never be good again. Think about why tank feels unfun or felt unfun until this patch and still is unfun for most people. Most people say it's too much responsibility because you have the most influence. So it's the most pressure on you, right? You have to do everything, and if you don't do your job, you get flamed the most, right? The team will come into chat and go tank difference. And I do that too. And I get that. Most people probably don't want that much of a responsibility, right? Some people might enjoy it, but for most people, it's too much, right? It's too much pressure, and everyone on the other team is shooting you too. Because if you're that powerful and the enemy team doesn't shoot you, you just kill everyone. So before this massive tank buff that came out mid-season, season 11. We had tank that was really unfun because everyone shot them, right? Everyone focused them, right? If you play tank, the enemy counterpicks you, they pick Bastion, they pick Ana, they anti you, you get sleep dart, you get stunned, right? Everyone just shoots you. But why is that? It's because tank has always, as Alec Dawson just confirmed, has always had the most influence on the game. If I don't shoot the enemy right hard over and over and break his shield, he's gonna run into me and kill me. The goal of the devs is to make people to play more tank. What does buffing tank do? You have even more impact. It makes you have even more pressure. So it's completely counterintuitive. If they want people to play more tank, they should make tank less impactful. Because then the pressure is lower and people will start shooting other things. I've had this idea for a long time. I'll go over it real quick. So we don't have like a guy in the comment be like, oh, you don't have a solution. What would you do? Make tank really tanky like it is now, maybe even more tanky, and reduce their damage drastically. What's gonna happen is, if you play tank, you can still run into the enemy and force them away, right? Because if you have like 1000 HP on Rhine, even if you do a bit less damage, the enemy DPS will still have to run away from you and respect you, right? So you can play your role, but then the enemy would not be incentivized to shoot you, because you wouldn't die. You would be a true tank. That's how tank is in WoW. That's how tanky heroes are in Dota, right? Where you don't want to shoot the tank. You want to shoot everyone else. It's a basic lack of understanding of how the game works by the lead hero designer of the video game. I have so many friends in this game. I've played this game for 7-8 years, and every person I know is having a horrible time right now. Not a lot more people play tank. Now everyone else is just miserable too. It's a 1v1 of tanks. Everyone else is spectating. And even on tank, you feel like you're not having fun because you're still taking all the cooldowns and you're still getting counterpicked, right? You pick D.Va, the enemy picks Zarya, then you swap to Junket Queen, right? Then the enemy picks D.Va. It's just counter swap. Now that they confirmed 6v6, it's like, yo, they're finally listening, right? Like, surely 6v6 will fix this game, right? And I think it won't, because of one simple fact. Incompetence of the lead hero designer here. There's so many examples of them just showing a clear lack of basic game understanding. Alec Dawson is incompetent at balancing the video game. Hire someone that actually cares about the game and knows how the game works to balance the game, right? Or maybe listen to pro players giving you feedback, streamers giving you feedback, high-level players giving you feedback, the general community giving you feedback, instead of being so far up your own ass to where everyone hates the game. Every single streamer, every single player. And you're like, I think we went too far, but it was intentional. It was a good job. We did a good job. Hey me, well done. I made tanks so strong that nobody's having fun in the game anymore. But I'm not gonna fix it because it was intentional. Of course it was intentional. People are hyped for 6v6. Gonna come out soon and it's gonna make the game perfect, right? No. There's gonna be so many interactions between main tank and off tank. If you balance the game well, the game would be amazing. And 6v6 would alleviate a lot of the issues that tank has right now, right? You could tune down the strength of tank because there's 2 of them, and you could add more synergy, and there would be more creative plays, right? But what people tend to forget when they talk about 6v6, that even in Overwatch 1, they couldn't balance 6v6. And the big reason they went to 5v5 is because they were incapable of balancing 6 versus 6. We had double shield meta that they couldn't fix for over 2 years. We had goats where they had to add roll queue because tanks were so OP that nobody could even play DPS. And that was the old balance devs. Now look at this guy here that doesn't understand how basic balance works. Or when he has done something correctly, like Season 9, everyone had fun for at least a few weeks. But every time we get like a little high of Overwatch, it's like Alec Dawson comes into office, smokes a blunt and goes like, huh, how can we ruin the game this time? You really think this guy will be capable of balancing complex interactions in 6v6 if he can't even balance 5v5? I'm talking about like combos like Ramatra Mauga, right? Where you cycle like overdrive and then Ramatra goes in punches and has infinite health, right? There's so many combos, new combos that are now possible in 6v6 that I do not trust an incompetent person like that to balance. I really hope I'm wrong here, but I think the most likely scenario we're gonna have is they're gonna eventually, in a few months, come out with a 6 versus 6 playtest, and people are gonna play it, and it's gonna be so horribly imbalanced. There's gonna be a few tank combos that are gonna be so utterly broken that nobody will have a good time. And then they have other genius ideas, right? They still don't wanna admit that 6v6 might be the better idea. They also wanna experiment with different 5v5 game modes. So they're working on a test mode right now where you can only pick 2 heroes per role, right? So what happens is if you log into a game and 2 people pick support and 2 people pick tank, there's only gonna be 1 DPS, right? How are you gonna balance that? 2 tanks are always gonna be better than 1. Open queue players know this, right? In open queue, tanks have less HP because of how strong they are, and they're still meta, right? Like right now, the meta in open queue is like 4 tanks as support, or like 3 tanks to support, right? People that play meta, and they're gonna pick 2 tanks, and then the team with the 2 DPS will lose, because tanks are just better than DPS. Tanks are better at dealing damage, tanks are easier to play, allow for way more mistakes, right? There is no reason to pick a DPS over a tank right now. For casuals, people that are new to the game, I always say this, Overwatch is an amazing game. If you're new to the game, it's free to play. You get in, you play like a bunch of heroes you've never played, right? It's really well polished, right? The game has amazing skins, the game has amazing maps, the game looks amazing, the game sounds amazing. But all of that crumbles when you spend like a few more hours in the game and you realize, wait, I'm just irrelevant. I play DPS and the enemy tank picked Diva. I can't play the game. And then you have Alec Dawson sitting in an interview and telling you to your face, yeah, that was actually intentional. I want you as a human being to be worthless in the game. Because tank decides how the game works. Even though we've known since launch of Overwatch 2 that tank was the strongest role, we made them even stronger in hopes that more people pick tank. And guess what? It didn't even work. I spent like a few other videos talking about matchmaking, and I've come more and more to the realization that the matchmaking is actually not that bad anymore. I think the Season 9 matchmaking changes were really good. But it really doesn't matter, because if you're playing anything but tank, you're just kind of flipping a coin. You hope your tank is better than theirs.
Let's go gambling!
It sucks to see one person having such a negative influence on this game and getting away with it time and time again. Do you really think you're doing a good job and making this game fun and engaging for everyone? I'm not saying you have an easy job here to do, right? But how about you listen to people that know what they're talking about? I don't think of myself as a mega smart human being, but I will never understand how your goal is to get more people to play tank because people don't enjoy the role, and you make it even, like, you put even more pressure on the role. In consequence, you make everyone else miserable too. And you could say, Metro, you've played the game for 7-8 years, you're burnt out. I don't think I'm burnt out. Everyone feels the same way. Like, Flats and Emong don't even play the game anymore, and when they do, they play DPS or quick play. While tank is in the strongest it has ever been. And you really think everyone is burnt out at the same time? It's time for a change, if you want to save this game. If I have anything else, I post it in the comments. Let me know how you feel. Do you think I'm overreacting? Do you think the balance devs are doing a good job? Do you think this game can be saved? Fuck you, Alec Dawson. Bye.